Hello, everybody, and thanks for joining me again today for our Bible study. We are in Psalm 20 today. Psalm 20, you can get the free PDF on our website if you want it. You'll also see it up on the screen. The first section of the PDF is always the author. Who authored this psalm? Same as the last couple. It is a psalm of David. But interestingly, he seems to be recording some words of some other people. We'll talk about that as we introduce our outline section on the next page. As far as New Testament references today, I'm not aware of any New Testament references back to Psalm 20. We do have some themes, though. We've got two, pretty simple. Number one, the people of Israel put their trust in God to support their king. And then number two, God protects his anointed one. We've also got two definitions, and both of them are places today. The first is Zion, which we've defined in a previous study, but I wanted to include it again in case anyone wasn't with us for that study. Zion specifically refers to the hill or the mountain on which David built his palace. It was on the southeast side of the city of Jerusalem. Zion, though, is many times used in the Old Testament just to refer to the city of Jerusalem as a whole. So then we have the sanctuary. What is the sanctuary? The sanctuary is most often a reference to the temple in Jerusalem, the place where God's presence dwelt among his people. Now let's step over to page number 2 and talk about our outline. There's only 9 verses in this chapter, and I've entitled it, God Save the King. We're going to see similar words to that at the very end of this psalm. It's all about David's people praying that God would preserve their king, give him victory, and therefore give their nation victory. Now, this is a psalm that it'd be nice to have a little bit more context about it, because we're kind of left to interpret some of the pronouns in the psalm and try to figure out who it is that's doing the speaking here. Because the psalm is written by David, but there's a lot of pronouns there's a lot of pronouns like the pronoun we. We see, we desire this, we pray to God for this. And then in verse 6, we have the personal pronoun I. So who is it who's talking here? Most commentators, and I think it makes sense, most commentators think that the people of Israel are praying for David, and that's the we. And when we get to verse 6, we'll see David saying, I. That's David kind of interjecting, putting a personal statement in here, affirming the words of his people. But the majority of the prayer is the majority of the psalm is David documenting a prayer that his people offered on his behalf. So hopefully that makes some sense. I think maybe as we go through the outline, and hopefully you've already read the chapter, it'll fit together. And let me know if you've read any other interpretations that are perhaps more compelling to you than this one. So once again, in Psalm 20, David appears to be documenting a prayer that his people offered for him on his behalf. Based on the wording, it may have been a prayer that they prayed and offered before a battle or before a particular time of trouble. The psalm begins with the people asking the Lord to help David in his, quote, day of trouble and asking for God's protection. They ask God to send his support from Zion or send it from Jerusalem. They prayed that God would allow David to accomplish all of his goals and all of his plans. And the people shouted for joy and rejoiced in their expectation that God would do this, that God would bless David and would give him success. The people say that they want their banner to be set up in the name of the Lord. And this is probably a reference to an army's banner or an army's standard, as you'll often hear it called. The army's standard, which is oftentimes a flag, not always, but a lot of times it was a flag that somebody carried when they went out to battle. The standard showed the army's identity, their loyalty, and in whose name they fought. So the people want their standard to be in the name of the Lord. They're going out in the strength of God. Now, as I mentioned in verse 6, and you may have noticed this if you read it, David appears to record a personal statement amongst this larger prayer that his people are praying. He said, quote, now I know that the Lord saves his anointed. David was the anointed king of Israel. He will answer him from his holy heaven with the saving might of his right hand. So we see that it wasn't only the people who put their confidence in God, but David had personal assurance that God would come through, he would give him his right hand, or he would give him the strength of heaven to face whatever danger he had to face on this day of trouble. And then it seems to return to documenting the words of the people. The people express that their confidence is in God. It is not in the size of their army or in their military prowess or strength. They said, quote, "Some trust in chariots and some in horses, but we trust in the name of the Lord our God," which that verse is somewhat well known, and you hear it quoted quite often. The psalm then draws to a close with the people asking God to hear their prayer and to save their king. So that is the 5-minute summary of Psalm 20. Now we go down to our application. You'll notice as you read this psalm that the people have an expectation of success. They believe that God was going to help their king and ultimately their nation succeed. And the question that I want to ask for application is this positive expectation still present in God's people, in our churches, and in God's saints? Do we have an expectation of future success, of thriving in the future when we look towards the future of our churches, maybe our local churches? I know many people, maybe they don't express this exactly, but you can hear it in the way that they talk about the church. Many people have lost hope that the church can flourish in the years to come because of the rise of secularism, because of the declining numbers in church membership and church attendance and things like that. They expect the church just to kind of continue in this slow decline where they are. I think especially in Western countries you see this a lot. They foresee dark years for religion in the near future, and they've kind of lost hope that they can win any battles and that they can push back the enemy. In many cases, they've just kind of resigned themselves to being part of a church that is shrinking and maybe in some ways is falling apart. But that isn't an attitude of faith. That's an attitude of a person who has already been defeated, and we certainly have not been defeated. That shouldn't be the attitude of people who believe that God can give them his right hand of power. We have a reason to believe that the church can be better off in 10, 20, 50 years from now. And that reason is God, the same reason that the people of Israel had hope that their nation was going to succeed and that their king was going to be protected and blessed. We have a great king today, Jesus. We have a great God, and his right hand is on our side. We should have an expectation of future success. God's power allows for an optimistic forecast, even if in the moment the storm clouds are rolling in and things are getting darker.